Good morning, students. Welcome to the subject of productions and operations management. We are dealing with unit number 5, that is all about aggregate planning and maintenance management. I have been telling since I started the unit that this chapter or this unit has been divided into 3 different parts, that is aggregate planning, the capacity planning, and the maintenance management. As far as the aggregate planning is concerned, we are done with many aspects, right? If you just want to check it out, we are done with the introduction of it, definition is over, importance and approaches. One of the approach we have already taken up in the previous lecture. Today we'll be taking up with the another approach and maybe the methods of aggregate planning. Alright, so if we are just asked a question, or if a thing or if a term like aggregate planning strikes us, what should be our answer? Then any business would always strive to fulfill the demand of the customers, right? And that too with the limited resources that the business have, and that is why when we are making a planning for a period of 6 to 18 months, then what can we do is that area of planning, that intermediate time period that we consider, and for that whatever the planning is made by the manufacturer, that can be considered as a part of or is a part of aggregate planning. And thus aggregate planning is such an approach which tries to strike a balance between the available productive capacity of the organization and the expected demand for the near future of 6 to 18 months. When we do a planning considering the existing capacity with the expected demand of 6 to 18 months, that can be considered as a part of aggregate planning. Thus we cannot build the fixed assets. It is such a kind of condition in which the long term strategies, when you are making up, means we are thinking of say 5 years, 10 years, maybe more than that, then in that period or in that duration, maybe the fixed installations can be done, fixed capacity and a change in fixed capacity is possible. But as far as the intermediate time period is concerned or short time period is concerned, it is not possible to make changes in the fixed assets, that we have seen quite in detail yesterday, that we can't make the installations, we can't get the say machines all of a sudden, that okay, if the demand is going to rise, you want to have 2 more machines, something like that cannot be done. Then what is to be done? At that time we have to make the arrangement in the existing capacity, whatever the existing capacity is, we need to make the arrangement, we need to set everything so that we can meet the demand of 6 to 18 months. Thus it is such a kind of planning which is important to the organization, because it tries to optimize, it tries to maximize the operational activity, and thus by balancing whatever the capacity that it has and the expected demand, right? And that is how it becomes a part of the long term strategic plans also. So what you have to focus here, or what you have to understand conceptually, is that aggregate planning is such a kind of planning, is such a kind of approach in which everything is being planned out to meet the demand of the customers between 6 to 18 months. Because the time period is not long, it is a short time period, or we can call it intermediate time period. Because of this time period, we cannot have the heavy installations of the fixed capacity, cannot be manipulated rather. That is why the current assets are being checked out, the current assets are being adjusted to the rise and fall in the demand. And when we make such a kind of planning, it is more or less known as aggregate planning. This is what we have seen earlier, right? So if we again wish to take up with AP, then what type of information we need to have? We need to have the information about whatever the available resources are, that is men, machines, material or money, right? Next information that we need to on the other side is expected demand forecast. And the third thing, all those policies which are required to strike a balance between the expected demand and whatever the resources that we have. That means policies regarding changes in the requirement, right? Whatever the changes are required, you need a kind of policies for that, and the knowledge about that should be there to take up with AP. Mind you, three things are important for AP to be done by the manufacturer. Number one, whatever the available resources are, it includes all the 4 M's, that is man, machines, money or material, right? Next information, set of information that will require is about the forecast of the expected demand, that between the period of say suppose 6 to 18 months, whether there is a rise in the demand or fall in the demand, that forecasting has to be done. And the third part is all the policies regarding the changes required. Whatever the changes are required, you need to have the planning for them, that whether you will need more number of people, whether you will need more amount of materials, likewise, right? So if you have these three set of information, AP can be done easily. And what will be the output once you are using this information at the end of AP? After you have done aggregate planning, what will be the output? You will come to know about almost the tentative total cost of the plan. At the same time, you will also come to know about the projected level. Projected level means something that is going to happen in near future. You will come to know about whatever type of or whatever amount of inventory, output, employment, subcontracting, or maybe whatever the back ordering is required. These may be the result of AP. Thus, it is such a kind of arrangement in which the enterprise tries to strike a balance between the inputs and future aggregate demand that is going to rise between 6 to 18 months. This is what is known as AP. Right, almost in the since last 2 lectures, and this is the third one, I have been constantly repeating the concept of AP so that we can relate better with whatever the current lecture is, right? And so in today's lecture or in today's session, as I told you, we'll be taking up with the next approach, that is bottom up approach. We have already seen the top down approach, right, that we have seen. Just let us try to see it one more time, that there are two approaches. That means any company, if it wants to take up with aggregate planning, then it can be done with two major approaches. Either it goes with the follows, or it takes up with the top down approach, right, and the next one is bottom up approach. Now what is the speciality of top down approach? Let us try to revise it with an example so that we can get it better with the bottom up approach also. Alright, as far as top down approach is concerned, the name itself tells you that everything, the entire plan is worked out at the highest level. That means from things comes up, or information comes up, or execution of the plan comes up from top to gradual bottom, right? Same way, the entire plan is being worked out at the highest level. That means at the first part or at the first stage, what do? We consolidate the demand of what? Demand of all the products that are being produced by the firm in a product line, right? We consolidate the demand, means we bring it together, we combine the demand, and what do we do at the next stage? At the next stage, then what we do is with the help of whatever the consolidated demand is, I'll come to an example, it should be more clear to you then, right? With the whatever the consolidation of the demand and capacity is, that we come to the first stage. Next stage, that what we do is, after taking up the product families into consideration, that means all the products that are relative to each other and they fall in the same product line, we take up the characteristics of all these say product in a single product, and that we call it pseudo product. That means a hypothetical product, or we call it imaginary product, is being created. That means it shows that all the characteristics, if present, of all the type of product that we are going to produce, or average characteristics are present, then at the end we'll be able to deduce that, okay, if this thing is possible, or if this product can be produced, that means all rest of the family products are easy to produce. And at the third stage, what we do is we disintegrate. Disintegrate means then we allocate the plans and sub-plans and resources for the individual product. That means again we disintegrate to A, B, C, D, whatever the product manufacturer may be producing, right? For this we took up a simple example there, if you remember, that if PQR is a company, ABC are the products it produces. With the help of the top-down approach, they have been able to consolidate that there may be rise of demand of 200, 300 and 400 units of ABC products respectively, right? Means at the end, they need to produce 900 units, and that becomes the consolidated demand, and we need the capacity to produce these 900 units for the next period of 6 to 18 months. Now this is said to be step number 1, where we are consolidating the demand. Again, what we are doing, we need to also consolidate the requirement. Then requirements may be man, machines, material. Here we have taken up 3 things to understand, right? So if whatever the requirements are to produce this 200, 300 and 400 items, we are consolidating, we are getting it together, right? That becomes the first stage, when what we are doing, we are consolidating the demand on one side, and we are also consolidating the requirement on the other side, right? So now coming up to the third one, or the second stage, what we do is, then at the second stage, once we are clear that this much will be required to meet this much of demand, then what we do is, with the help of the characteristics that are aggregated of A, B and C product, we try to create the product which is imaginary product, or which we call it pseudo product, right? Which is Z in our case. Then this Z product is such that carries the characteristic of A also, B also and C also. We try to check that whether we will be able to produce this pseudo product or not. If yes, that means tentatively it is clear that if that can be produced, that means if we disintegrate, then A, B and C are likely to be produced. And that is why at the third stage, what we do is, we disintegrate these requirements and the demand into again A, B and C. That means the fall of instructions or the fall of action is from top to down. That is, at the highest level, we consolidate. What we consolidate? We need to consolidate the demand on one side and the requirements on the other side. At the next stage, we need to have the pseudo product present there. Pseudo product is such a kind of imaginary product. એની ખાસિયત શું છે, તો એ કેરી કરે છે ઓલ ABC જેટલા જે પ્રોડક્ટ લાઇનના ફેમિલી પ્રોડક્ટ્સ છે એની લગભગ કેરેક્ટરિસ્ટિક્સ, એવરેજ કેરેક્ટરિસ્ટિક્સ ઇઝ being held by the pseudo product. And once you can clear, or once you can check with this pseudo product that yes, things are possible, or the production is possible with the existing capacity, or whatever the changes are required, we'll come to know at this stage. And then accordingly we can at the third stage disintegrate. That means whatever the requirements are, whatever the capacity is, and how we can optimize the usage of all these with the help of producing A, B and C product, that can be disintegrated, that can be disallocated, and that is what is known as the third stage. So this is how the top down approach goes, right? Now what we are going to do is a reverse process, which is known as bottom up approach. Again, the name is self-explanatory. Bottom-up approach we'll try to understand, and again with the example it should be more clear. It is also known as say resource requirement planning, or it is known as the rough cut capacity planning or sub-plan consolidation approach. Alright, here what is the important thing here is that this approach involves developing of a plan for major products or product families at some lower levels related to the product line. That means everything is being initiated at the lower level. Everything comes up from the lower level to the middle level and then to the top level, and then the exact decision related to the production is taken up at the top level, right? This is what is known as bottom up approach. What happens here exactly? This method helps to estimate the plant capacity that will be required to produce an aggregate plan. Naturally, why it is used, why these both the approaches are used to plan out that how we can make, or how the requirement would be, or what will be the capacity to meet the aggregate plan, right? So this method makes us helps to estimate the plant capacity that will be required. Whatever the plant capacity is required, that requirement will come to know with the help of this bottom up approach. Here what happens is, planning estimates are done at the bottom levels, which is dealing with the production of varied type of company's product. That means the bottom level employees, or maybe the workers, or maybe the supervisors, they are given the chance, or they make the estimate that if we want to make this much of these many items for the to meet the existing or maybe the future demand of 6 to 18 months, then whatever the requirements are, that estimate is taken up by the lower level employees, right? And then these sub plans are consolidated to arrive at the aggregate plans. It is just a reverse process of top down approach. Whatever the requirements are at the bottom level, that is estimated, that is forwarded to the to have the consolidated capacity or say consolidated plans at the top level, right? Various product families and product lines are studied by the lower level managers who collect the first hand knowledge about the future of the products. That means lower level employees or managers or maybe supervisors take care to collect all the information related about the related to whatever the manufacturing we are supposed to do, right? This approach is also called the resource requirement planning. It is known as RRP also. This is usually used with the material requirement planning, means we make the MRP. RRP is resource requirement. Resource may include men, machines, material, everything, right? And material planning basically includes only the MRP, that means the material requirements. Again, that is prepared by the lower level employees, means two things are worked out, RRP plus MRP. Who does this at the bottom level? Maybe the supervisors or maybe the employees at the lower level takes up with such kind of planning, right? Then what happens is here both material and capacity must be available for the production of the products, and thus material plans need to be coordinated with more material details plan. That means with MRP we actually come to know that whatever the materials are required to produce whatever the rise in demand is, that is being calculated. At the same time, whatever the capacity or the resources other than material we have, we try to coordinate, we try to go with the detailed plans, and then at the further levels maybe the consolidation is done. On the basis of the requirement planning, a tentative master production schedule is being then prepared, right? With the help of MRP and RRP, what is being done? A kind of master plan schedule is prepared at the middle level, that is known as MPS. It thus helps to ensure that a proposed MPS does not overload any key department, machine or workstation. See, with the help of master schedule, what we come to know is, we'll come to know that there is not overloading in any crucial department, neither any of the machines are kept idle, right? And with whatever the capacity is, existing capacity is, we are trying to make the optimum use of all these capacities to have the best production done, and that can be known with the help of MPS, that is being prepared with the help of RRP and MRP, right? Hence it is a quick and cost effective method of finding out the difference between the capacity requirement and already existing capacity. So with the help of MPS, what do we come to know? We actually come to know that, see, this much will be the requirement of the production or maybe the material or the resources, and this is right now what we have. That means we'll be able to exactly find out the difference or any kind of variation or deviation that is there in the existing requirements and the existing or maybe the future requirements and the existing capacity. That can be done very well with the help of this particular bottom up approach. All right, here we'll try to understand this with the help of example. If you see, we'll start with the bottom there, right? If you see there, A, B, C are the products. Tentative demands for them are 200, 400 and 300 units. That comes to 900 units of consolidation. This is taken up by the lower level employees, right? What do? They try to find out the tentative demand. With the help of these tentative demands, what is being done? There is a kind of when this is done, that okay, expected demand is this much, that may be taken up by the market research department or maybe the top level management, that they may focus on this, that this may be the estimated demand. Now work out on it. Then the actual work starts at the bottom level employees or maybe the supervisors or the workers give their requirement with the help that if you want to produce A, B and C item, we will require 300 units, 400 units and 200 100 units. That means that MRP is given, material requirement planning is done. With the help of these MRP, what is then done? A kind of master schedule is being prepared, which is known as a master planning schedule, right? And it is done by the middle level managers maybe, right? What they do, they exactly with MPS, what can be done is the existing capacity can be actually compared with the required capacity, and if any deviation found that okay, required capacity is more than existing capacity, then that can be adjusted, and that is what is aggregate planning all about. And with the help of that, then at the top level, whatever the outcome of MPS is, on the basis of that, then the policy decisions are taken up by the top level management, right? And they try to find out, or they try to frame the policies accordingly. This is what is known as basically the bottom up approach. Top down approach and bottom up approach are the two approaches that helps to have the AP, that is aggregate planning, done in an organization, right? We are moving towards the fourth aspect of aggregate planning, that is said to be the methods. Now see, whatever the type of unit may be, whatever they may be producing, whatever the line of products they may be taking up, whatever the capital investment it has, so many factors are there that are to be considered, and depending upon that, it takes up with aggregate planning. Now to take up aggregate planning with one single method is not possible, right? So what is done, that there are multiple methods available, and out of them the manufacturer selects the best one for him, depending upon the data that is available with him, maybe the type of experts available with him, whatever the resources he has, then he tries to use the best possible method. And that is why we are going to learn here the basic 5 types of method, which are generally taken up by the organization to take up with AP, right? What happens with this method, that once the AP is done, the calculation of aggregate planning can be taken up with these methods to arrive at the correct decision, right? So AP, because it is for the short period of time, it is based on forecasted demand, it is quite challenging, and to bring up the optimum plan may not always be possible. That is why to come up with the same or perfect planning may not be possible. Planning is always limited to the uncertainties, right? So it is not possible to come up always with the optimum plan. That is why there are many methods available to, or the techniques available to give the appropriate aggregate planning, and those methods are listed here. Like it has say graphical method can be used, informal method can be used, mathematical or linear programming method can be used, heuristic method or budget methods can be used. There are more methods, but we are going to study these 5 methods here one by one, right? So when it comes to say the graphical, the things are available in your text also, right? Here I have just concluded with I am not going with the steps how to follow with the techniques. I am just trying to tell you about the meaning of the method and how basically it has its own use, right? When we are talking about graphical method, it is considered to be very popular and easy to use kind of method, right? Under this method, what happens is that aggregate demand and the supply of the product is presented in the form of graphs with the periodic cumulative figure, right? A graph is prepared, and on the graph, whatever the linings are, or however the fall of the graph is, accordingly the presentation is done with the help of this graphical method, right? These plan works with a few variables at a time. Means if you are producing few things and few variables are to be considered, this is the best method that can be used, right? The planners are able to compare projected demand with the existing capacity. With the help of this graphical method, what can be done? The planners can compare the projected demand, that means the demand for the future, and whatever the existing capacity is. So what happens, how it is representing? Generally this supply line has to be straight, indicating the constant production. So if you are having a constant production flow, then the graph will show you the straight line of supply, right? And the cumulative demand curve, which may vary, gets adjusted easily. And then what happens is the graph is showing you, say, the demand curve, so that can be adjusted to the supply. And this method is very easy to operate and can be visually, it is very easy to understand, right? Though we must understand this, that cumulative supply line is indicated the showing the constant production, right? And this method does not guarantee the optimum producing plan. See, it is a kind of graphical representation wherein there may be chances that you may be misguided, right? But sorry, it's not the best method to go for it, but yes, if small, if less variables are there, we can go for this type of graphical method, in which with the curve and with the straight line we can show supply on one side and the demand on the other side, and with the help of this the AP can be done. So that is what is known as the graphical method. When we move to the informal tools, the second method was informal tools. Now what happens at these informal tools? The aggregate planning is such a process in which it compares the market demand projection against the existing and potential inventory capacity. We know this, right? AP is such a kind of thing which projects the demand on one side, and the other end whatever the existing or maybe the changes in the inventory capacities we can make it, and that is why it is known as AP for the period of 6 to 18 months. This is what AP is all about. It uses for this, what it uses so many types of tables, charts, maybe the graphics are used for data processing system to collect the method, to collect the information and to store it. This type of things are being worked out, right? This type of tools are used. These tools are used in AP to compare the variety of alternative ways of achieving a company's supply management goals with the help of tables, different types of charts, with the help of different graphs. What we come to know is, we come to know about the data, we can compare it, and we can find out the alternative way of producing or maybe achieving the company's supply goals, right? When using this type of informal methodologies just by itself, means just by using these only, there is one greater disadvantage, that is that they might not provide the most optimum plan. Naturally, when you are trying to collect everything in aggregate, that means everything you are trying to collect, you are trying to put up in the form of charts and maybe the graphics and everything, but because it has not got its validation for the next future, every time you may get the optimum plan out of using this method may not be possible, right? Because whatever the information or informal tools we are using, they are just a way of providing us with the information. Probably it may so happen that they may not result into the optimum use of or we may not come to deriving at a proper planning. It may be the greatest disadvantage of informal tools, and thus companies should evaluate things accordingly. And that is why we cannot only depend on this particular method. The company has to have the proper calculative and proper say consolidated method with which they can arrive at a better plan. The third one is about the mathematical technique, right? Mathematical techniques are used in the aggregate planning process. For example, production rates. See, where whatever the things we can put up in numericals, always mathematical tools can be used, right? Suppose HR requirement is there, production requirement is there. With the help of linear programming, we can have the known variable and unknown variable. We can use linear programming and we can find out the better ways to be used, right? Here whatever quantities to be minimized or maximized and the limitations we can find out with the help of because we have the numericals with us, we can have the data in numbers, we can always go with this technique, right? One of the greatest disadvantage with using mathematical technique is this, that such a linear programming method in aggregate planning is assumption of generalized determinants to application. That means whatever determinants we are using, they may be very generalized, in particular that they may not give you the same result, and that is the greatest disadvantage. Though overall means compared to the other techniques, it is a better technique to be used, because here we are getting the data with the help of proper numericals, which is the outcome of a better research, and that is why the plans are more viable as compared to the other methods, right? This is what is known as the mathematical technique. When we go for the fourth technique, it is the heuristic technique. Now heuristic method can speed up the aggregate planning process based on experiences and knowledge of the planning team. Very important and very commonly used method of aggregate planning, because if you have the experienced staff and there is enough team available there, then always we can go with this method, because using the experience and knowledge of the planning team, what can be done, the better results can be availed. Examples of heuristic planning may be judgments based on past experiences, or maybe industry have their own ways of the practices, and they can even take up these practices into consideration, and likewise the planning can be done for the near future. It is used in aggregate planning because the process is driven by the organization's decision makers who draw upon their knowledge and experience. Most of the time, see, this is such a kind of planning that is such a kind of method that is more or less taken up in combination with any of the methods that we may be using, right? Because it is based on the experience and knowledge of the say particular person, or maybe the team, or maybe the organizers, decision makers, right? So more or less this method is always used in combination with the other type of methods, and we come to the conclusion, or we can find out the aggregate ways of having the aggregate planning done. For example, a framework used for the planning production might involve heuristic technique on production management's past experiences and specific inventory areas at the different production level. That means at the different production level, what had happened in the past, those experiences can be related, or those experiences can be taken up as the base, and then the aggregate planning for the future can be done. As I told you, because there is experience involved, there is the past trend involved, there is knowledge of the decision makers involved, it becomes a practical way of finding the solution, or maybe getting to the AP, right? The next and the last one that comes up is the budget method. You know this, and you have learned somewhere in fundamentals of management also, that budgeting is such a kind of tool, or budget is such a kind of tool which we generally use it for the planning purpose also, and for the controlling purpose also. So here when we are taking up with aggregate planning, we can use this method, right? How it comes to use, let us see it. A firm's budget noticeably shapes the estimates for the production capacity of the firm. If you are preparing the budget maybe for the materials, or maybe for the techniques, then what happens is that you are shaping up the production capacity. You are trying to judge the production capacity of the firm, and then you try to meet the demand that is going to rise. Generally, budgets are developed using the factors that are also used in aggregate planning, like whatever the existing levels of inventory is, whatever the valuation of it is, whatever the purchasing pattern was, how the human resource and production capabilities were used in the past budgets are kept as the base, and then on the basis of this the budget is being prepared or maintained for the future, and accordingly the aggregate planning can be done. Thus again, aggregate plan operates with the financial constraints during the allocation of money for the various products and services. Only drawback of this budget is that there may be variation related to the finance, or maybe there may be the limitations of allocation of money. Previously you may have supposingly used less amount of money in inventory, but here the scenario, or maybe at present or in the near future, the scenario may be so that you may have to use money to a greater extent. Then at that time there may be limitations of this budget method, right? So considering all these things, the budgets are prepared, and this budgets becomes the more or less a tool through which the AP can be done. Thus aggregate planning and preparing budgets are closely related, or it is a kind of activity that is more or less related to very important business functions, right? So even preparing the budgets and getting the aggregate planning are correlated. So if you are preparing the budgets, that means more or less we are taking up with aggregate planning also, taking up its own limitations depending upon the different determinants that the unit has to consider. All these, taking up all these things in mind, then again the maybe AP can be done. So today what we have checked out are the bottom up approach. That is one of the approach that with which the AP can be done, or using this approach aggregate planning in an organization can be done. And we have checked out with the 5 different methods that more or less is taken up to come up or to initiate with aggregate planning. Alright, when we meet in the next lecture or maybe in the next session, right, we'll be taking up with the last part of aggregate planning, that is how the aggregate planning is done as far as the intangible services are concerned, and that will be the last session of aggregate planning, the part of aggregate planning, right. Then it will be CRP that will be done, that is capacity requirement planning, that will take up, and the maintenance management. As we have done with the various aspects of aggregate planning, same way the second and the third portion of capacity planning and maintenance planning will also be dealt. By the time we meet next, it's a goodbye from my side. Take care of yourselves. Thank you.